What is happening, Hypesters? Welcome back to part 6 of the Making a Game in HypeHype tutorial series. In the last video, we added some reusable collectibles and hazards to our game, and today we are going to start to build out a level for this guy to run around in. So the first thing we're going to take a look at are a few environment and ground settings that can be found in the hamburger menu. If you open this up and you don't see, for example, the ground settings are not there, it is because we are in the world builder and not the game editor. We are going to want to look at some logic and other advanced features during this tutorial, so make sure you are in the game editor by tapping that little icon top center. Now we can see here at the top in the settings, we have background and fog, and right underneath that we have ground. I'm going to start with the ground. So in HypeHype, we have 3 different types of ground settings. We have the infinite plane, which is just a flat ground that is going to stretch out in all directions as far as you want to go. We also have empty, which of course is no ground, which would not be good in this case because we have a little guy here that needs to stand somewhere. If we start with no ground, he's just going to fall forever. And then finally, we have the height map. The height map is a little tricky to work with, but essentially what it does is it uses a black and white image to create some hills on the ground. There are a few limitations and problems with this tool currently. I think one of the biggest ones to note is that it is not infinite. You can see here it has a very clear edge, and it's not super huge. So it's only really good for doing kind of like smaller environments. Or maybe something where your player is going to be walled in. They're not going to be able to go forever. So let's reset our view here. And let's turn this ground back into the infinite plane, which is what we want for this example right now. And what else do we have in here? There is the ground bottom. This will just change where the ground is. Right now we're at -0.5. You can see as I pull it there, it goes down. We can kind of see it easily by dragging it up and down around where our guy is there. So we can set that wherever we want. We can also manually input a value here if we want. -0.5, that's where we were. That's where I'm going to keep us. We also have this destroy out of bounds. This is really handy, especially on hypes that don't have a ground. If something is to fall out of the world and there's no ground, like I said, it's just going to fall endlessly. So you might want to destroy anything that falls below a certain point. And you just turn that on with the toggle. And now anything that goes below that 0.5, which of course right now nothing is going to be able to because there's ground there. But if we were in empty and things fell below that 0.5, they would automatically be destroyed, thereby saving you the performance of the game calculating an object that is just endlessly falling through a void. We also have here some ground materials. We can change the physics type of the ground. We can also change the ground color. This takes us to the background and fog menu where we're going to go in just a moment. And we do also have a gravity slider here, so we can change the gravity for our whole hype. We can also change some gravity settings in individual physics materials. So multiple ways you can adjust gravity as well. Now we're going to go take a look at the background and fog. And what this is really about is colors. We'll go into the edit mode here, and you can see we have 4 colors to work with. So first is the fog color. You can see there as I pull it, we can see what the fog is doing. Maybe we want our fog to be a little lighter, maybe a little yellow, something like that. We also have ground color. Maybe we want our ground color to be a little more green. And then our sky color, of course, is going to be our sky. Maybe we want to pull that so it's a little bit of a brighter blue, or even maybe since we went kind of yellow with the fog there, we could make it a little more orange, yellow, reddish, whatever we feel like for the vibe of our game. I'm going to keep it pretty blue for now. But color is a great way, especially when you're doing remixes, to quickly change the look and the vibe of a hype. We can also change here the fog values. So this is going to basically be the amount of fog in the hype. If we want to really limit that fog, we can put the end to the maximum and we can really drag out the start here. And you can see as I'm dragging this, when it's low, the fog is kind of really deep. As I drag it out, the fog kind of thins out. And if I drag it all the way to the end, so they're both at 80, then we just kind of have a hard line where visibility stops. I wouldn't recommend doing that unless it really suits your game. So you're going to want to have a little bit of a gradient to your fog. And how much you want is really dependent on what you want your game to look like. So we're not going to spend too much time on that. We do also have different types of background. So right now we're looking at the gradient type. I think that's probably the most common ground type you're going to see used in HypeHype. But we do also have the option, if we want, to just go solid color. That's going to make our background a solid color. And then we also have the procedural sky, which along with the procedural sky node, you can actually make, for example, stars. You can have a sun in the sky that will be based on the angle of your sun node, stuff like that. But definitely, especially when you're getting started, I would suggest using the gradient. It's the easiest to work with for sure. And just while we're talking about colors, it's a good idea to never forget the visual materials. Another way to quickly change the look and feel of a hype is to go in and edit your visual materials. We can make our coins, give them a little more of a gold look there. I like that. It gives a little more contrast to the highlights. Cool. And now, as you see, I changed just that one material, and every material that is using that color got that change from the coins to the little buckle on our homie's hat there. And the colors are a great way to unify the look of your hype. We'll get into that probably a little bit more later. But for example, if your theme is really dark, having some like really brightly colored objects, it maybe is not going to fit super well. Maybe you might want to have some objects that really stick out, and making them brightly colored against a dark background is going to be exactly what you want. But that's what you can do with color, all kinds of stuff there. So now let's get into building out the level. And to start, I'm going to go through and delete most of the stuff we have here already so that we can focus on building out our level from scratch. We certainly don't want all of these finish lines in here right now. We'll decide where the finish line is going to be after we've built out our level. All right, so first thing we want to maybe do is add some objects that are going to be good for our obstacle course here. So we'll go to the asset library. I already see this bridge here. I like that. I'm going to just take that and I'm going to set it aside here. I'm just going to grab a few objects so that we don't have to keep jumping back and forth between the asset library. Let's just do all of that right now. Maybe we want a ramp. We have different styles of ramp here. I'll take the big simple ramp. We'll put that there. So there we go. We have a few objects. And one thing we're going to notice with these objects is if we go and we run around, hey, we're just running right through these. We can't jump on top of them. What's that all about? So when you bring in objects from the asset library, most of the time they're not going to have any physical properties. So what you want to do is you want to grab that object, and right here where it says physics, just change that to unmovable if it's not going to move. If you need it to move, then you'd want to set it to dynamic. In this case, though, we want all of these to be unmovable. One thing to keep in mind with that, too, is let's say, for example, we had copied this platform. We just were like really eager to get going, and we just started throwing objects in, and we copied a whole bunch of these little platforms, and then we started testing, and it's like, oh, none of those platforms have physics. That could be a little bit of a problem, but we go in here, we go to the actions menu, we're going to do select similar objects, same model, select all 5 of them, and then all 5 at once we can set to unmovable. We can do that for the rest of these, and we'll want to make sure to try and remember to do that anytime we're bringing in a new object from the asset library. Now, there's another feature we have that will really help when it comes to building out a level, and that is going to be tile sets. If we go here and scroll at the very end here, we have tiles, and this gives us a list of all the tile sets we have available in the app. For now, I'm just going to take one of the simple ones here so that we can show this. So we put it in there, and we have just a simple little square. I'm going to hide that goal area. We don't need to see that right now. But we can quickly fill in space with this by tapping it and hitting this paintbrush Now you see we have a grid here. We are in the tile set editor, and I can just grab a tile, pull and drag, and fill in a big area with that. And most tiles are also 3D, so I could come to the side here and build one at the ground. If I tap like you just saw there, it's going to add an individual cube. And one thing to keep in mind while you are working on this is the working plane. You can see the grid here that represents the working plane we are working on, and it kind of changes around as we move around. So you want to be conscious of that. There are likely some improvements coming to this tool in the future that will make it a little bit easier to work with that plane. But for now, just make sure that you are working where you want to work. And if you really get stuck, like say, I want to be back on the original plane there, and I'm just can't really seem to get it back, we can just exit the tile map editor from the little arrow in the corner there, grab it again, and start painting again. And we're back on the plane where we want to be. And one thing to also keep in mind with that is if you tap on top of existing tiles, it's automatically going to move you up. So you can see there, now we're on the next level up and we're drawing some more squares. And if there is an object in the way, it is going to automatically move up to try and avoid putting a tile on inside of an object. So now we have some objects, some obstacles, some tile maps in our scene. I'm going to spend a little bit of time here building out the level. And we're going to speed it up so that you don't have to sit here and watch the whole thing, which could take a little bit of time. So as I build out this level, I'm going to give a few kind of general design tips that at least I always try to keep in mind when I'm building a level. So one thing to try and keep in mind is to keep it interesting. You always want the player to have something to do, to have something to keep them moving forward in your game, whatever the objective is. You want them to kind of stay locked in, stay engaged with your game. And I think one of the main things that I see people do that this tip speaks to is creating parts of their level, like maybe you just have a long hallway and the player is just walking through that hallway, nothing to do, no obstacles to jump over, nothing to explore or look at. They're just walking down the hallway. Like, my advice is don't do that. Like, if you have a long hallway section, put some stuff there that will make it interesting for the player, whether that's things to investigate, whether that's something cool going on in the background. Like, it doesn't always have to be interactive. You could have the player walking through a long hallway where they're not doing much if while they're doing that, there's something else going on to hold their attention, to keep their interest. Another thing I always try to keep in mind is to keep it fair for the player. And there's a lot of different ways that you could interpret this tip. But I think one thing that I really try and think about is a consistent difficulty in your level. You don't want it to be easy, 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 and then have something super hard right in the middle of it, right? If it's going to be a hard level, make it pretty hard the whole time. Obviously, you don't want the exact same. You want to have some hills and some valleys in the difficulty, but you don't want any super drastic jumps, especially from very easy to very hard. Another thing that I always try to keep in mind is to really try and be conscious of the fact that people will try and break your game. They will try and take advantage of anything they can to get a good score, especially if there's a leaderboard there. So you really want to watch out for those areas where the player might be able to circumvent what you want them to do, whether that is some shortcuts or some workarounds, maybe something that doesn't work 100% right, and there's ways that you can get through it without doing what you're intended to do. Anything like that, things that the speedrunners would call cheese, I really try to avoid it. Maybe it's something you want in your level, and in which case you definitely build it in there. I think this kind of goes along with the previous tip about keeping it fair. If there's ways that players can break your game to achieve better scores, it's not necessarily fair for everybody. So I try and avoid that as much as I can. And that's actually something where HypeHype has been really nice for me, because sometimes I'll release a game and I won't have caught something, and a player will find some way to cheese the game, and then I can go back and fix it, which is nice. My final tip on level design is going to be what we call memorable moments. And this, going back to my first tip on the long hallway, the thing going on in the background could be a very memorable moment. So you could have a section of your game where the player's not doing much, but something really cool is going on, and that might be the thing that they take away and be like, this level was awesome because this thing went on. There was a giant beast in the background battling another giant beast as I walked down this hallway, and they were throwing things at me. I'm just making stuff up on the fly here, but you get what I'm talking about here. So memorable moments are usually going to be big, over the top, not necessarily, but some big moments that are really going to stand out in the player's mind when they finish the level. Okay, and now I'm going to shut up and focus on building out my map for a little while. Let's check back in when it's time to play test. Okay, so now I've laid out a really basic level here. Not my best work, but I was trying to go fast. I didn't necessarily use all of the tips that I just gave you. I think one in particular that stands out in my mind is the memorable moments we do not have here. But we have a nice level here where there's some variety. The player is constantly having to think about or do something more or less. And we can get up here, and this will be the end of the level. So the last thing we want to do here before we call this tutorial quits is filling this in now with the reusables that we had in the last tutorial. So we're going to go here. First of all, obviously at the end here, we're going to want one of our goal areas right here in the middle. And I think actually I really like this goal area. I made this a square for the demo, but I would like it to be a circle again. So I'm going to hit that circle, and I'm also going to go, whoops, we need to be in the game editor here. I'm going to go to the reusable, and I believe there was a simple animation that we have turned off. I'm going to turn that back on so that we get a little bit of animation out of our goal area there. We don't really need to see any of these. We're just going to drag them in. So let's grab some coins. And you can see here with these coins, I am just copy pasting these around. And the nice thing we can do with collectibles is we can kind of guide the player to go places where maybe they wouldn't have gone if they're just looking for the fastest route through your level. So if you want to have some little side things, like maybe over here, we could add in like a little bit of a little skinny platform. And then over here, there's like a little bit of a fat platform. Whoops. We don't want that errant one there. Where we could have like a bunch of coins. So obviously, if you're just trying to complete the level, no reason to go over here. But if you want to get all the points, you want to go over here to get these 5 coins. All right, and then the top platform is our finish line. So there we go. We filled our level with coins. And now we also have our hazard. We'll go back to the reusables here. We'll drag this hazard into the game world. And these, maybe we're going to use a lot of these. It's good if you're copy pasting a lot of stuff to kind of rotate some of them so that they're not visually exactly the same. You'll get what we might call tiling, which is where you can clearly see that an object has been repeated a bunch of times. You just go throw a little bit of rotation in there, and that gets rid of that kind of tiling effect. Now I have 3 of these. I can copy and paste this. Whoops, didn't want to do that rotate. I can copy and paste all 3 of these to make this a little more interesting. And again, we can kind of use these hazards to guide the player through the level to get them to go where we want them to go by presenting something dangerous that they have to avoid as they play the game. And of course, presenting some opportunities for shortcuts, time savers for those players that really like to do that kind of stuff. I always like to give them a little something. And of course, you don't really know what that is going to be until you do extensive playtesting. So one thing to keep in mind while you are building out your level is to test it frequently. Okay, And there we go. Now we have a basic level. Again, maybe visually not the most interesting. That is something that I would definitely spend a lot more time on as I polished out my level, adding some like nice little details, maybe some more of these little side areas where the player can go and get some collectibles. One thing I would do with this level in particular is we have not built checkpoints into this level. We could, of course, add checkpoints, pre-made checkpoints from the asset library. But since we don't have checkpoints, I decided to just kind of keep this a pretty short and sweet level. And there we go. And I think that's going to do it for this part of the Creating a Game in HypeHype tutorial series. In the next video, we're going to jump back into Logic and look at setting up some scoring, setting up a leaderboard. We're also going to take a little bit of a look at the UI and text nodes. So tune in for that one. Really good stuff there for setting up and polishing your games for players. Until then, I've been Shogun. Peace out, Hypesters. To start, we're going to look at a couple of settings in the hamburger menu. You can have a sun in the sky that will actually mimic the from the coins to the little bucket or the bucket. Just delete most of the stuff that we have in here already. So here we go. We've got our guy in an empty level. And what happened to the health meter there? All right, let's stop again. And that does it for this